The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Iran's supreme leader Khamenei has called for death to America on Saturday. Khamenei told a crowd in Tehran that Iran would not capitulate to Western demands. The crowd started shouting death to America, and the Ayatollah responded, of course, yes, death to America, because America is the original source of this pressure. It reminds me, I don't know if you've seen this Family Guy episode, Lewis, where they have Osama bin Laden recording one of the videos that Al-Qaeda would sometimes release. And he very casually says, oh yes, death to America, death to America, death to infidels or whatever. The way this was transcribed as happening with the Ayatollah in Iran struck me as similar. Oh yeah, of course, death to America, in addition to everything I'm saying.
Yeah, death to America is just kind of implied. Perhaps he thought he didn't need to say it because that's always the tone. But yeah, kind of funny.
Khamenei's comments contrasting with those of Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, who said achieving a deal is possible by the March 31st target date for some kind of preliminary agreement at least. Meanwhile, John Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, claiming that there has been substantial progress towards an agreement. Kerry said that there are still important gaps remaining, but that progress has been made. France, which, if you may remember, raised some last-minute objections back in 2013 to an interim agreement with Iran, could again threaten the deal. They are opposed to providing Iran with relief to with regard to international sanctions. They want a longer time frame for restrictions on Iran's nuclear activity, etc., etc. A quote from the French foreign minister: France wants an agreement, but a robust agreement. That is to say, an accord that really guarantees that Iran can obviously have access to the civil nuclear program, but the atomic bomb? No. This is getting super complex now, Lewis, because a lot of, at least Americans, I don't know specifically what's happening with people in the different European countries that are involved here, but at least with Americans, people are getting confused because on the one hand, it's true that we have newly reelected Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been fear-mongering about Iran and nuclear weapons for a long, long time. But the fact that Netanyahu is exuberantly fear-mongering doesn't change the reality that Iran still says stuff like death to America and is a threat in the Middle East. Now, some will say, well, David, Rouhani, the president, has not actually said that. It's the Ayatollah, and the Ayatollah has no power. Lewis, I think your dad would disagree, who's from Iran, that the Ayatollah has no power.
We could argue that the Ayatollah is the only one with the power, and that the president is just a figurehead who, does he even really disagree? Who knows? Maybe it's just for PR. But we can't let Iran blow up Israel because the country is run by the Ayatollah, who is a religious fanatic, and we can't allow that to happen.
And I share much of our audience's disdain for the right-wing Netanyahu. And it just so happens that Netanyahu thinks Iran could make bombs within 3 months, but so does the US and England and Russia and France and Germany. So we have to, and I know this is tough, and I know we're going to get hate mail because of this, we have to soberly separate Benjamin Netanyahu's fear-mongering and our opposition to a right-wing, highly religious coalition in Israel, which we oppose, to the reality that there is more than just Benjamin Netanyahu in the US saying that Iran could be 3 months from a nuclear weapon, and what is clearly a desire from at least some important elements in Iran to use, well, let's take a step back, not necessarily use nuclear weapons against other countries, but at least see other countries disappear.
Not only is it in our best interest, and of course Israel's best interest, that Iran does not produce nuclear weapons, it's probably in Iran's best interest that they do not do that as well.
And hey, our ally Saudi Arabia, which has a significant interest in stability in the region, probably doesn't want Iran having this capability. You have countries, you see the more secular facets of Egyptian governments not wanting this. So we have to decouple. It's just the U.S. and Netanyahu who are saying this and want this because it's factually not true. But let's maintain our criticisms of the Netanyahu administration. I don't know if everybody's able to do this.
No, I think in the eyes of some people, you have to be against Israel and Netanyahu simultaneously. But this really isn't about either one of them.
Ted Cruz is running for president of the United States. Instead of forming an exploratory committee, Ted Cruz is just running for president. He tweeted about it earlier today, making the announcement at Liberty University, which in and of itself is quite funny. He's expecting to raise or hoping to raise somewhere between $40 and $50 million over the course of his primary campaign. He's going to have to rely on the Tea Party base, which has been into him big time. And I'm actually super curious what will happen with birthers and Ted Cruz. Remember, Ted Cruz was born in Canada. Fox News already kind of trying to preempt the birtherism on Cruz. They put an article out saying, quote, last month, Cruz addressed the citizenship issue during a question and answer session with none other than moderator Sean Hannity of Fox News at the CPAC conference. I was born in Calgary. My mother was an American citizen by birth. Under federal law, that makes me an American citizen by birth. The Constitution requires that you be a natural-born citizen. But Lewis, there's no question that President Obama's mother, Ann Dunham, was also an American citizen born in Wichita, Kansas.
Yes, but Barack Obama is also a Democrat and black, so that really doesn't matter, does it?
John McCain was born on a military base in Central America. Under law, that is part of the U.S., but Canada, under law, is not part of the U.S., and it just exposes the blatant, transparent double standard of the Obama birther movement. Cruz is an opportunist extremist. The country would truly be in a sad state of affairs if Ted Cruz were to be the next president. I would argue if Ted Cruz is even the next Republican nominee, it will just show the sad state of affairs that we're in.
I don't really think he has a shot at the presidency, but I think regardless of who becomes president, if it's a Republican, we should start kind of a faux birther movement just to highlight the absurdities of this one.
Ted Cruz in the past has said that George Soros leads a United Nations conspiracy to eliminate golf. Ted Cruz has spoken about wanting to gut Social Security. Ted Cruz used as an example that New Hampshire had snow and ice everywhere in the winter as an indication as to why he tends not to believe the actual science around climate change. So Ted Cruz, a Tea Party embarrassment and exactly what we should be getting away from in this country politically, the first to jump into the presidential campaign on the Republican side. And just around the same time that Ted Cruz announces that he's running for president on the Republican side for 2016, he gets booed off stage at a Christian event. Ted Cruz, while speaking at the Conference for Middle Eastern Christians, which we could talk about that conference a little bit, but let's kind of put that on the back burner for now. Ted Cruz booed off stage after he took the opportunity to speak at this Middle Eastern conference, Middle Eastern Christian conference, to go on an anti-Muslim rant. Let's take a listen to the very end of what Ted Cruz was saying, and you'll see the boos start, and Ted Cruz choosing to cut the speech short and just kind of very quickly wrap up and wander off stage.
Please, respect for dialogue. Respect, please. Okay. We're in America.
I will say this, I am saddened to see that some here, not everyone, but some here, are so consumed with hate that you cannot address your brother. I will say this. If you will not stand with Israel and the Jews, then I will not stand with you. Thank you, and God bless you.
So I think some clarification is needed here because Ted Cruz mixing in Islamophobia with Christian pro-Israeli sentiment. Just because someone is a Christian does not mean that they are supporters of Israel. In fact, you would probably be confused unless you knew about the history of right-wing evangelical Christian support of Israel. You would say, why are the two connected? One of the best things about Israel's creation is its creation as a secular country, mostly by atheists. That's one of the best things about the country of Israel. This Christian obsession with Israel for religious reasons about bringing on the second coming of Christ, it's one of the creepiest elements to me, Lewis, of evangelical Christianity.
It is. It is. And, you know, I think the crowd here is largely on board with the anti-Islamic stuff. But when he brings up that we should side with Israel, the crowd doesn't really seem to like that. This crowd has an aversion to our allegiance with Israel. And I think that's a big part of why he was booed off stage here.
Yeah, and it's just a complete gong show. Everything going wrong. The speech was ridiculous. The context of evangelical support for Israel is something that is just so disturbing. The framing of anyone who is not blindly supporting all Israeli policy as anti-Israeli also I find to be absolutely ridiculous. I mean, look at us, Lewis, and highly critical of the current administration in Israel, of the settlement policies, of so much of what's going on. And at the same time, having nothing whatsoever to do with the blind anti-Israel in all instances movement. And there's just so much getting wrapped into and mixed up to this discussion. And Ted Cruz just kind of dropped into the middle of it and booed off stage at a Christian conference. Not something that you would expect. Send me your thoughts on this. Twitter.com/dpacman. We have a great show for you today. We'll take a break and be back with plenty more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I hope you're enjoying today's show. Remember that our program is funded by individual members, viewers of this program through our membership program at davidpakman.com/membership. A lot of great member benefits, including a whole extra program hosted by producer Lewis just for our subscribers. Today's new member of the day is Danielle Carson. Danielle, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. We depend on support from members like you. And you can join Danielle at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also support our program if you ever use Amazon.com to buy anything at all. You can first go to our website, davidpakman.com, and click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. Then do your shopping, no forms to fill out, nothing else to click. Amazon sends us a little kickback. A lot of people, Lewis, buying Passover Haggadahs, depending on your specific pronunciation. Will you be attending any Passover Seders, Lewis?
Probably not, but I can't say with certainty. But because there is a community over here that I have tapped into recently, and maybe I don't know, maybe I'll get invited to one.
Yeah, in fact, I think there may be some stories connected to your tapping into that community that would be probably only appropriate for the bonus show, but certainly some interesting stories you have. Some years I haven't gone to any Seders at all. And I'm now scheduled to go to 2 different Seders. It's going to be pretty tough. I'm starting to try to just tell myself that it's supposed to be horribly boring, like painfully boring to go to a Seder, that it's just kind of part of the experience.
Well, it can be. And yes, it usually is. But that's what the bar is for. That's what the whiskey is for and the wine. And that's how you cope.
I have to say, I've never seen whiskey at a Passover Seder. Plenty of wine, but never whiskey.
You're going to the wrong Seders, my friend.
Also, a couple of people getting Josh Preville's documentary, Losing God, through our Amazon link. Great documentary. We've interviewed Josh Preville twice about that film, and we've recommended it. Losing God, thanks to everybody who streamed it or downloaded it or bought the DVD through our Amazon link. Rick Santorum met a woman who's actually crazier than he is, and that is probably something that doesn't happen too often. Over the weekend, Rick Santorum spoke at the South Carolina National Security Action Summit, The event was sponsored by conspiracy theorist Islamophobe Frank Gaffney. And Rick Santorum, after speaking, decided to take questions, and he got a question from a woman who comes off noticeably crazier than Rick Santorum. And that's really an accomplishment in and of itself. Don't you think, Lewis?
I think that, first of all, I listened to almost this woman's entire rant. And, you know, some of it is quite accurate, and some of it, like accusing Obama of trying to detonate a nuke in the Carolinas. Well, you know, I don't need to go on about that.
Yeah, the campaign finance stuff that the woman named Virginia mentions is pretty, you know, accurate, right? I mean, we talk about that. But for the most part, a crazy unhinged rant. The camera will be on Rick Santorum as we hear Virginia's question. Listen to her talk about John Boehner's secret deal with Obama to allow undocumented immigrants to come in. And I particularly like where she escalates her voice, crescendoing, asking about a communist dictator destroying her country. Listen.
Ellisor, a retired school teacher, lifelong political activist, and lifelong resident of South Carolina. I'll ask you the same question I asked Senator Cruz. And I'll preface it by saying Michelle Bachmann, I think it was King, said that Boehner made a deal. My question is on defending this country. Thank you for what you do for national security. I'm concerned about sealing these borders and protecting the United States. I've fought that battle all my life. Thank you. And I'm losing, and it's because I'm not getting help from my Congress. And anyway, Michelle Bachmann and King, in an interview on one of the stations, said that Boehner made a deal with Obama back in September to be on board with his executive amnesty. The American people put the Republicans back in office in the House and the Senate, and the two things we asked y'all to do were shut down Obama's executive amnesty and shut down Obamacare. And you didn't. You let us down on both issues. Why is the Congress rolling over and letting this communist dictator destroy my country? Y'all know what he is, and I know what he is. I want him out of the White House. He's not a citizen. He could have been removed a long time ago. Larry Claiborne's the one that got the judge to say that the executive amnesty is illegal. Everything he does is illegal. He's trying to destroy the United States. The Congress knows this. What kind of games is the Congress of the United States playing with the citizens of the United States? Y'all need to work for us, not for the lobbyists that pay your salaries.
I mean, Louis, it's amazing. Rick Santorum seems taken aback by this woman.
He does. She seems to be in some type of trance almost. So she just keeps going and going, and there's not really a question. She just wanted to rant in front of Rick Santorum about the president. She
was eventually asked to step away from the microphone after several minutes of this. I won't subject you to the entire thing. I'm thinking, though, National Security Conference, right-wing conference in South Carolina, organized by Frank Gaffney, with Rick Santorum as speaker. What can you really expect?
I think there are probably many people in the crowd who shared her ideas, and she was the lucky one. She got the microphone.
I think I saw this woman, Lewis, on my recent flight back from Arizona. Air marshals had her duct taped to her seat, you know?
You know what? It wouldn't surprise me if that's happened to her before.
Have you ever been on a flight where someone has to be restrained?
No, but I think I've been on a few flights where some children should have been restrained, but no, it's never happened.
Yeah. Did you have someone kicking your seat on the last flight back, by the way?
Not on the last one, but I've had to deal with that in the past.
Yeah, I had it. I have it every flight, essentially.
Well, yes, you have some terrible luck with flying all around, really. Cancellations, children, bodily fluids, you name it.
Rick Perry has executed an innocent dad after a prosecutor hid exculpatory evidence. If we want to build a case against the death penalty based on one U.S. state alone, Texas would be a pretty good choice, wouldn't it?
Texas is number one. Yes, it needs to stop here. I mean, there's so many innocent people that have been killed here.
The State Bar of Texas has filed a formal misconduct accusation against the prosecutor who secured a conviction in one of the country's most dubious and disputed death penalty cases. And the complaint alleges that John Jackson, who was at the time an assistant district attorney, withheld evidence that pointed to the innocence of Cameron Willingham, who was executed under Rick Perry's watch in 2004 for the murder of his 3 young daughters who died in a house fire in 1991. The complaint says, before, during, and after the 1992 trial, ADA Jackson knew of the existence of evidence that tended to negate the guilt of Willingham and failed to disclose the evidence to defense counsel. The complaint also says that Jackson, by the way, later became a judge, went very far to get favorable treatment for Johnny Webb. Johnny Webb is the man who testified that Willingham had started the fire in question, and the complaint also says Jackson dishonestly told a court he had no other evidence that might help Willingham's defense, which of course he would be obligated to disclose. Jackson maintains he did nothing wrong. He insists that Willingham, who was 23 at the time of the deaths, was guilty of arson. However, this Johnny Webb, who was the one that said, oh, yeah, it was Willingham who started the fire, Webb recanted the testimony in the year 2000. Remember, the execution took place in 2004. Okay, of course we should try to have prosecutors who will not do this, but there is no way to undo prosecutorial misconduct if you've already killed the convicted innocent person in this particular case. You can give the family money, you can punish the prosecutor, but you can't bring back the man that died because of the prosecutor's misconduct. And I agree that there's a broader conversation here about using jailhouse informant testimony, because it's way too easy for a prosecutor to convict innocent people by finding someone in the jail to say, oh yeah, he confessed to me. That's one conversation, but the conversation around the death penalty is the bigger one here.
It is, and it has to go. There's just an assumption that that the judges and that the prosecutors and that those giving testimony, that everything just works perfectly, and we're to accept that. But no, it's not a perfect system by any means.
And I'm not trying to excuse the incarceration of people who are innocent, but what I'm saying is you can compensate someone for that. You ruin their life, often taken the most valuable years of their income producing lifetime, but you cannot possibly compensate someone when you've put them to death.
Right. And even when you have someone who admits to a crime, oftentimes they are doing that under, duress, or there's a coercion. And so even then, you can't say with certitude that that they necessarily committed the crime that we're talking about.
32 states have the death penalty, 18 have abolished it. That's 36% of states. It has to go. It just simply has to go. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Scott Myers-Lipton, who's professor of sociology at San Jose State University, founder of the San Jose Minimum Wage Campaign, and also the author of Ending Extreme Inequality, an economic bill of rights to eliminate poverty. I thought it was so interesting that you used the term extreme inequality. We've recently been talking a lot about extreme poverty and drawing a distinction between those living on $1 a day, for example, versus those living in the U.S. below the federal poverty line, for example. And the idea of drawing that distinction was not to devalue or to say that poverty in the U.S. is less important or less of a problem than those living on $1 a day, but merely to give a sense of the scale of what we're talking about. So talk to us a little bit about that term, extreme inequality. What do you mean by it?
Well, I'm a sociologist. A standard class in sociology is something called stratification or inequality. So if we talk, this is something we talk about all the time, this idea of inequality. And living here in the United States in a capitalist society, there's some sense that there is a certain level of inequality that is to be expected. What has happened in the last 35 or 40 years, though, has, developed and generated into what I would call extreme inequality and unacceptable inequality. And if you want to use, kind of moral terms, immoral, where there is the level of wealth and income inequality between the top and the middle and the bottom is not only what I would call immoral, but just no longer, sustainable for the United States. And these kind of societies, I mean, if you go back to, let's say, President Kennedy, when I was a young boy, when President Kennedy said, when you have these types of situations, and particularly he was talking about Latin America, you cannot have a stable democracy. And so this is not only, I would say, this extreme inequality is not only a threat to our social fiber, but it is also a threat to our political institutions.
And talk to us about some of the numbers around this in terms of concentration of wealth, poverty, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we'll get to the solutions because, we sociologists, one of the things my students, just get so frustrated with, and why I wrote the book and kind of on this solutions perspective is that by the midway, they're like, they're in what they kind of sociologists call the social science of doom. But I'll lay it out pretty clearly. If you look at, and why I think we have extreme inequality is we have the bottom 20%. The bottom quintile, as we say in sociology, that group in the last 30 years is actually about 4% less, has less income than it did 35 years ago. The middle has stagnated. We're back to where we were really in the 1990s of our middle. In fact, in the last several years since the Great Recession, down from about 57,000 median income to 51,900. So we have a stagnant middle class. It may be decreasing a bit in these last few years. We have a lower class that is going down, but we have a top 1% that is skyrocketing, is unprecedented growth. And if you look at the numbers the last 30 years, up 120% in income. And the concentration of wealth that you talk about, which is really key, from the last 30 years, concentrated from 33% of taking all of the wealth, now up to 40%. So this is the extreme inequality that I dramatize in the book, and then I think appropriately offer some, what I would call as a new social contract, because this is no longer working for the great majority of Americans, both in the middle class. If looking back at writing the book and titling the book, that's a group process between us and myself and the editors. I think I probably would have titled it differently. It would have been, an economic bill of rights to eliminate poverty and rebuild the middle class.
Can you clarify just that last bit of data, though, on wealth concentration? You said from 33% to 40%, but I missed what percentage of the population controls what portion of the wealth?
Yeah. So if you look at the concentration of the wealth, the top 1% controls 40%, has
Got it.
40% of all the wealth. The top 20%, in this day of age of, post-Occupy, we talk about that top 1%. But let's now talk about the top 20%. The top 20% controls 89% of all the wealth. And what we mean by wealth is, stocks, bonds. In addition, generally we think of our wealth in our house, but these are in addition to that. And the difference is between, let's say, a poor and a wealthy person is when you get sick, if you have wealth, then you can survive and actually continue with your standard of living. But if you're in the bottom 20 or 40 and you're living day to day and you have no access to wealth, then you are going to slip further and further, and we see this massive homeless population. That's a direct result of folks not having access to wealth, and then they slip onto the streets.
So let's talk a little bit moving into the kind of solution phase.
Yeah.
We had FDR, of course, with his idea of a sort of second Bill of Rights. You talk about in your book about this economic Bill of Rights, and the areas which you discuss are job, living wage, decent home, adequate medical care, education, and protection from the fears of unemployment, sickness, and old age. Pragmatically thinking, we talk about all of these issues all the time on this program, and what we're seeing come up as an obstacle to real solutions in the U.S. is that the most logical solutions are what is attacked by the American right as socialism. How can we get past that obstacle?
That's a great question, David. And I humbly put forward an answer to it. So if you look back at the Economic Bill of Rights, the second Bill of Rights that FDR proposed, he put it forward in '44 in a State of the Union address. He was sick the night he was supposed to give that talk. He goes into a side room of the White House. He gives the State of the Union because he can't get over to Congress. He gives it at kind of a fireside chat, but then he calls in the press and he asks them. He says, "I'm saying something tonight that's really important. I want you to record it for history." And he says, "I'm calling for an economic bill of rights, a second bill of rights, because while we have, and I think it's questionable at the time in the 1940s, in light of where we were, particularly with our social rights and political rights for African Americans and other people of color." We weren't there yet, but he generally said, we have our political rights in this country, but the way capitalism has developed, and we do not have our economic rights. And so he called for this second Bill of Rights, and then put it out there. End of the war, is coming to a close. He passes away. Truman attempts in those early days of his administration, attempts and gets beat back by the right on this. So really that idea then kind of goes into, is not talked about until Martin Luther King picks the up idea again, starts calling for an economic Bill of Rights. And of course, that March on Washington, if you look at the three fundamental parts of the march, or the Poor People's Campaign on Washington 68, were the right to a job, the right to adequate housing, and the right to a living wage. Those were his three specific proposals, the heart of the economic Bill of Rights. Of course, he's assassinated in 68. Again, not talked about much in these past few years. So there's several of us trying to bring this idea up for a 21st century second Bill of Rights. And let me say why I think it's so important and why I think it's crucial is for the American people, a couple of things. One is, I think the key thing is, and people don't like to hear it. My father, for goodness sake, doesn't like to hear it, but here's it must be said. Capitalism itself is the cause of the poverty and the inequality. And the minute you say that, we immediately, folks, put us into the communist socialist camp. And I would like to say, not a communist, or not in that camp, or I'm not in that camp. My family owns a small business. My father owned a small business. But that doesn't mean you can't say you can reform capitalism. And that's what FDR was trying to do. And that's what King was trying to do, Dr. King, is that trying to reform capitalism, trying to take the positives of capitalism, the unleashing of the creativity and the technology and the creation of wealth and for society, and at the same time having and limiting its tendency for inequality and poverty. And so
I think that to pause on that, I think that is going to have to become much more the forefront of the conversation. And it's challenging because the conversations around capitalism and so-called socialism have become so toxic because of the way that the terms are used to attack positions. Aren't we going to see, as automation improves, as technology develops, many of today's jobs are going to become unnecessary? Isn't it going to become even more obvious that capitalism can't solve all of our problems?
I would say so, and this is how I'd frame it. So framing is everything, right? So I would say this, and so you mentioned I was one of the co-founders of the minimum wage campaign in San Jose, and if you go back to 2010, this was before Occupy. This was in that spring, before Occupy, before our Walmart campaign, before the Fight for 15, before many of the efforts for dealing with this extreme inequality had yet sprung onto the scene. And there was a student, her name was Maricela Castro. She was the daughter of farm workers, and she was a student of mine. She saw students taking at her after-school YMCA program, taking food from the program and putting it into the backpack. And she asked them, "Why are you doing that?" And they said, "Well, there's not enough food at home for her brothers and sisters." And so she said, "Well, the obvious question, do your parents work?" And they're like, the kids assured her, "Oh, our parents work. In fact, they work 2 jobs, but they don't get paid enough. They're minimum wage jobs." And so this was the beginning of this idea of, she came back and said, "Profe, we've got to do something." And I said, in this class, it's a class on wealth and poverty. We don't really talk about, we talk about the solutions, but we don't actually do anything. I teach a class on social action. Come in with that idea. You can present it to the class, and if anyone's interested, they could join you. Well, she did that. 4 students decided to join that effort of hers to actually try to implement an increase in the minimum wage, and that led 100 meetings later, with labor, faith, and the nonprofit community behind us. We, the students, kind of led that effort to pass a minimum wage in one of the single greatest increases in the minimum wage, 25% from $8 to $10. And here's the key thing: with 60% of the vote, with the people that you're talking about, the Chamber of Commerce and the Restaurant Association spending over $1 million and probably close to $1.5 million against to defeat us. We had a very simple a frame, and I think we have to talk about what's the right frame. And the frame was this: if you work hard and you play by the rules, you deserve a fair wage. And it's not fair in Silicon Valley to be making at the time $8 an hour because you can't pay for rent. Even on that amount, you can't even pay for rent, forget everything else. And third, what it does is it forces people onto government programs. And so that message, and we were attacked. I mean, I can't tell you that we were attacked. I was personally attacked. The students were attacked. We're ignorant. We should take an economics 101 class. But we had a clear message on those three things. And then we had very much a targeted message of who we were going to target. And so we went after that and we had a ground campaign. We didn't have any money. We had less than, I think the whole campaign for the 2 years, less than $100,000 of money. And we went up against $1.5 million. And they had TV ads and radio ads, and we crushed them 60 to 40%. So I think if we can frame it in ways, and I'll just give you, so that was the example on minimum wage that we did. And I would say it has to be local and state. As you're saying, the feds, we have to give those ideas, and they've got to bubble up, and then we've got to push the national effort in the future. But where I'm working right now is at the local and state because of the gridlock that you're talking about. But that doesn't mean you can't create movement. What we've done in San Jose is now spread. Oakland just passed 1225. San Francisco went to 15. We're talking, all over the state of California because what San Jose did, it's occurring. San Diego, of course, Seattle, but the success of San Jose, and of course the right wing has said it was going to be horrible for the economy. Well, look at what's happened in San Jose. 2 years since its implementation, unemployment down from 7.6% to 4.6%. We've got more jobs in Silicon Valley now than ever before. Businesses are up. So you can't say you have this, you can't say you're going to have an economic doomsday, which is, they said, the mayor went on, in a State of the City address, it's going to destroy this city.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've seen the same thing as well in San Francisco. We've been tracking that for many, many years. And very, very interesting. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We've been speaking with Scott Myers-Lipton. The book is Ending Extreme Inequality, an Economic Bill of Rights to Eliminate Poverty. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, David. Have a great day.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Exciting weekend at Walmart. This sounds kind of like a satirical story, but it's unfortunately all too real. There was a huge melee in a Walmart parking lot in Cottonwood, Arizona. That's a town of about 11,000 people, about an hour south of Flagstaff, between Phoenix and Flagstaff. One of 9 suspects was killed. Another was shot in the stomach. All 8 responding officers were injured, including one who required surgery. This sounds like a scene from The Naked Gun with Leslie Nielsen or something, but it's a real story of something that happened at an actual Walmart.
And, well, I guess maybe statistically, Walmarts are so prominent and all over the place and large, and there are so many people going to them that, there's a better chance of this happening in a Walmart than a Home Depot, right?
What's known is that someone at the Walmart store called the Cottonwood Police Department a few minutes before midnight on Saturday, reported that a woman who worked at Walmart had been assaulted in the store by multiple suspects. The suspects were in the parking lot when the police showed up. They immediately attacked the officers. 2 suspects were shot, one in the abdomen and one fatally, while one of the suspects shot a Cottonwood police officer in the leg. Louis Solano, who's an eyewitness, said, "I heard about 8 to 10 shots. It was a lot of noise. It looked like a riot in the middle of the parking lot." The descriptions seem like it's a scene from Grand Theft Auto.
It's pretty incredible. You hear about these things happening at Walmart, but rarely are there so many people involved. I thought that this might be a gang-related type incident. That's what it sounded like to me.
Well, it seems like a family may have been involved, but not necessarily a gang family. Investigators believe that the 9 suspects were all from the same actual family. We believe they are from Idaho because of the license plate on their vehicle, DPS spokesman Bart Graves told CNN. Walmart shootings are starting to seem a bit too common to me, either inside the stores or in the parking lot. In 2014, there were 92 shootings at Walmarts, Lewis. That number has to surprise you, even taking into consideration the prevalence of Walmart stores.
It does. It is a shocking number. And I don't really know what you can do to change that. I mean, it seems like if there was this number of Walmarts in Canada, we wouldn't have that number of shootings at Walmarts in Canada.
Going from a Walmart in Arizona to a Walmart in Indiana, a meth lab has been discovered inside an Indiana Walmart. People have been getting the ingredients to make meth at Walmart for a really long time. Apparently, someone figured out it would be much easier to handle the cooking inside Walmart as well. That way you don't have to leave the store before making your meth. And a restroom in a Walmart in eastern Indiana has been closed indefinitely after an employee discovered a working meth lab inside. State police say that a Walmart employee alerted them after seeing a man he described as suspicious enter the restroom at about 11:30 p.m. Thursday with a backpack and leave without it. Delaware County health inspectors closed the restroom and the nearby women's restroom so that they could decontaminate it professionally. State police say that people who make meth are leaving deadly explosive chemicals in public to later return and get the finished product. Probably not too smart to do it in a place with so many cameras, don't you think?
Not very smart to be doing it at all. And you have to wonder about the quality of this meth if it's being produced in a Walmart bathroom.
You don't think it would be the 96% purity that Walter White was producing in Breaking Bad?
I would guess that it would probably not have that level of purity. Yeah.
I spoke to a friend who lives not too far from Muncie, Indiana, where this happened, and without getting into anything disparaging, he simply said, if you're familiar with Muncie, it wouldn't come as a huge surprise to you that meth is being cooked inside of a Walmart. It seems at this point, the only thing you can't get in a Walmart is a reasonable wage. Anything else you seem to be able to get there.
Yeah, it seems like given what Walmart offers with the ingredients, you could pretty much concoct just about anything.
We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This is a really funny voicemail. It's about Jews and gays. We hear a lot about blacks and Jews, but this time it's about Jews and gays. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David Patrick, it's Jamel from Buffalo, New York. What I want to ask you, why do the Jews always promote homosexual? I feel like every time I see about homosexual, it's always the Jews promote it. Just like Jerry Springer, who promote homosexual on his TV show. Every single transvestite been on Jerry Springer's show. And I thought homosexual was a sin in the Jewish religion, but it seems like you Jews, all you gotta do is promote these gay people. Like, what is it between the gays and the Jews? I mean, you and Lewis, man, support that transvestite going inside that Planet Fitness thing, calling that woman crazy.
Yeah.
But, man, females don't want them things inside a woman's bathroom. I mean, they should go inside a man's bathroom. And I'm just sick and tired of you and Lewis supporting gay people. I mean,
yeah. Okay, so let me address that because there's just a very, very interesting litany of questions there. First of all, since you're referring to you Jews and you mentioned just Jerry Springer, Lewis, and myself, I guess I don't really know for sure where the entire you Jews thing is coming from. But as far as homosexuality being a sin in the Jewish religion, most Jews, American Jews in particular, but really worldwide Jews, are very, very secular. They consider themselves Jewish culturally or Jewish ethnically, but not necessarily religiously Jewish. Jews seem to be very involved in the civil rights movement during the 1960s. Jews killed oftentimes marching with African Americans in the South. And Jews seem to be involved in the fight for gay rights as well, because Jews understand what it is to be discriminated against for thousands of years and kicked out of just about every part of the world. So my sense, Lewis, is that that's why so many Jews are progressive and in favor of equality.
Yes, because we are not that religious. And I think sins are made up, and I think you should read some other literature other than the Bible.
On today's bonus show, a lot of things to follow up on from our story about Tabor, Alberta. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I forget what the wrong pronunciation was that we said, and I know we got emails about the right way. I think it's Tabor, Alberta, the spitting and swearing ban. We will also talk about New Hampshire lawmakers giving fourth graders a harsh lesson in politics. And Lewis has a whole bunch of stories from South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, which I personally can't wait to hear. I have not heard them from Lewis off air, and he will tell us about that on the bonus show. To get access to the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up today, support the show, and check out that bonus show. It is world famous.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.